And now I would like to introduce today's special guest. I'm going to start with a quote from Thomas Edison, who once said, and I quote, "I found out what the world needs, then I proceeded to invent." 100 years ago, what the world needed was a light bulb. And the reason I'm quoting Edison, and if you didn't know this, just pretend that you did, is that he was the founder of a little company called General Electric. Well, things sure have changed a lot in the past 100 years. For example, light bulbs have come a long way since those very early days. One constant, though, over the past century is GE as major industrial and technological player. It was a conglomerate before there was such a word, growing from an electrical company in today's multifaceted international giant. Now you find GE almost everywhere: energy production and transmission, healthcare, insurance, aviation, and the media, even water. But being a giant is not always easy. We've seen some, like Enron and Canada's own Tea Eaton company, collapse altogether, while others like Xerox have had to adjust to entirely new realities from whence they started. The global demand for natural resources, for example, is increasing at a staggering rate. GE knows this only too well. It would appear that the people running GE are also aware that the effect on our environment is now staggering. Companies in Canada and around our planet face increasing challenge and responsibilities. How to react to monumental change going on rapidly all around us? What about the inevitable transformations down the road? Fundamental change, positive or negative, requires businesses to modify the way they think, and in many cases, to reinvent themselves. No large company is a better example of this mindset revolution than General Electric. GE has stepped forward. They're taking the initiative when it comes to finding new technologies, new ways to conserve and save our planet. What many corporations are finding out is that solving environmental problems is not only the right thing to do, but a profitable one as well. Tackling environmental issues is just a part of GE's stated mission to transform itself into a more efficient, aware, and lucrative company. Today we will welcome one of General Electric's inventive leaders. Toronto's own Elyse Allan started working with GE back in 1984, first in the US and then in Canada. She later became the president of the Toronto Board of Trade, where she succeeded in enhancing the board's role as an active member of the city's community. Elyse serves on the board of directors of the Canadian Council of Chief Executives, the C.D. Howe Institute, the Public Policy Forum, and the Board of Governors for the Canadian Council on Unity. She's also a member of the Young Presidents Organization and the National Roundtable on the Environment and the Economy. Her level of community commitment embodies the mission of GE as a good corporate citizen and a good neighbor. And we at the Empire and the Canadian clubs are thrilled to have her with us today to talk about ensuring Canada's place in this transforming global economy. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the podium the President and CEO of GE Canada, Elyse Allan.
Thank you very much, Noella, and I also want to extend my thanks to our head table guests as well as our sponsor. I really appreciate your support, and I'm sure the Canadian Empire Clubs do as well, and it's terrific to have you here as our guests, and in particular our students, because as I saw the three tables and I saw you stand, my remarks today are really about you. So I hope it's terrific that we put a face to the people that I'm really talking about here and the future that we hold for you here in Canada. So I'm delighted that you're with us. So good afternoon, and my thanks to the Canadian Club and the Empire Club for inviting me to share some thoughts with you today. I looked at some of the past addresses that the two groups have had over the years, and you both have a very laudable record of confronting the pressing issues of the day. One that comes up again and again, regardless of the era, is how Canada can make her mark both economically and bring prosperity to her people. So I'll tell you a story that was from the Globe and Mail. It talks about a rising industry that has increased sales to the U.S. and Britain. The Ontario government, reports the story, is exploring ways to make these Canadian exports even more marketable. The goal is improved production and enhanced reputation for Canada's ingenuity and quality. The date of the article, October 23rd, 1906, exactly 100 years ago today. The export in question, horses. And the article was quite certain about one thing, and I quote, "No matter what mechanical devices may be offered as substitutes," the Globe wrote, "the people of Canada, urban and rural, will continue to take an intelligent interest in the horse." Now, the horse may no longer be a pillar of Canada's export strategy, but that 100-year-old article is still very instructive. It tells us that while the particulars may change over time, the overall challenges remain the same. It also tells us that Canada has adapted to changing markets before, and I believe can do so again. How do we define our relevance in the dynamic global economy we see today? How can we improve our competitiveness within the transforming world economy? Those questions were valid 100 years ago and probably being asked by the Canadian and the Empire Club speakers back then. And they are just as valid today. A few weeks ago, I was with my colleagues in Europe, and I attended a meeting where we had GE leaders from throughout Europe, all the countries in Europe, Russia, Middle East, and Africa. And we were discussing trade flows, and we were talking about foreign direct investment, all in relation to market opportunity. And in one presentation on emerging nations, we saw a chart of the leading GDP nations today and a projection out 30 years. One of my colleagues from Western Europe turned to me and tapped me on the shoulder and said, and I quote, "Look, our countries have disappeared." How is Canada positioned today? By many key measures, we have had a strong run. From 1997 to 2005, Canada led the G7 in real GDP growth per capita, as well as unemployment growth. Unemployment is at its lowest levels since the 1970s. We have had 8 consecutive federal budget surpluses through 2004-2005. Our government debt as a percentage of GDP is the lowest in the G7. And earlier this year, KPMG named Canada as the lowest cost G7 country in which to do business for the 6th year. This is good news, right? Anne Golden, head of the Conference Board of Canada, has said that if Canada were a child, it would be in the gifted class. Abundant natural resources, skilled human capital, political and economic freedom, and a free trade relationship with the world's most dynamic economy. Yet, there are warning signs. In that latest Conference Board study, Canada actually lost ground in 4 of the 6 categories. The decline in, and I quote, economy, that category, is probably the most troubling as we've moved from 3rd in 2003 to 12th this year. In many measures, we've done spectacularly well when we compare the Canada of today with the Canada of past years. But quite simply, other countries are catching up to, and in some cases, surpassing Canada. We're losing ground in areas that are critical to our ability to compete globally. As Anne says, we're still in the gifted class, but we're being moved to the back of the room. A recent report from PricewaterhouseCoopers is called The World in 2050, and it talks about how the big emerging market economies will get, how big they're going to get. And it says that by the year 2050, the E7, that is the emerging economies, and I'll name them, China, India, Brazil, Russia, Indonesia, Mexico, and Turkey, will have easily outstripped the current G7 of the US, Japan, Germany, UK, France, Italy, and Canada. In fact, the E7 will be 25% bigger when comparing GDP with market exchange rates, and around 70% bigger when using purchasing power parity exchange rates. Now, there is no shortage of reports highlighting the dramatic economic and political changes that are taking place around the world today as we see China and India rise to dominance and the emerging countries just a step behind. These shifts present a huge challenge to Canada and most countries in the developed world. But it is also tremendous opportunity. I suggest the key to Canada addressing the New World Order is nothing new. You can find it in one of the most astute observations ever made about economic success. And it was made almost 150 years ago, not by a corporate titan or a business guru, but in fact by a man of science, Charles Darwin. In 1859, Darwin published his famous theory that the survival or extinction of each organism is determined by its ability to adapt to its environment. Simply put, an entity that endures, whether it's in the animal world or the corporate jungle, must have the ability to adapt. In times of rapid change, those who adapt the quickest will survive. And it's equally true of living things, companies, and countries. I am fortunate to be part of a company that took Darwin's lesson to heart. You heard a little bit about us from Noella. 19 years after this thesis, Thomas Edison founded the Edison Electric Light Company, and it merged with another company in 1892 to make General Electric. 4 years later, we were on the Dow Jones Index, and GE is the only company on the Dow Jones today that was on the original index. What is the secret to such longevity? Flexibility and adaptability. Today, GE products and services range from aircraft engines to medical imaging, water processing to financing, media content to power generation. An incredible variety, which we sum up in 3 words: imagination at work. At GE, we're guided by the desire to constantly embrace change, the opportunities around us, and the innovation within us. And that's what it will take, too, for Canada and for Canadian businesses to survive in this new economy. The message I want to leave with you today is that emerging markets are dramatically changing the economic and competitive landscape. To be successful as a business and as a country, we have to be highly flexible and adaptable. And in particular, there are 4 critical areas where this overriding principle must guide our actions in business and in public policy. The first is our people, the skills and education of our human resources. The second involves our natural resources sector and its ability to grow and to be a global player. The third is the business climate that we create for ourselves, the ability for companies to be agile. And the fourth is the attractiveness of our country, ensuring that people and companies want to come here, to live here, and to grow here. So let me elaborate. First, our people. What kind of workforce does Canada need to make our mark in the global economy? The competition for skilled labor is intense, and it's going to become more so. The whole world is graduating smarter people. We need a population that's well educated, with the skills and knowledge to compete with any other workforce in the world. And it's not just specific skill sets that we need to succeed, but that willingness to learn. Our people must be able to think critically and think creatively, bringing value to whatever job or enterprise they are involved in. In such a dynamic world economy, we will invariably experience both an inflow and an outflow of jobs. We need people who are multi-skilled and who can readily go from job to job and opportunity to opportunity. We need young people who enter the workforce with those aptitudes, and we need the right retraining for older workers. In a word, we need people who are adaptable. Where do we stand? We have an excellent record of participation at the post-secondary level, but still too many of our children actually fail to complete high school. Too many are lured into the workforce before achieving the level of education they actually need for a stable, satisfying, and productive career. Too few are pursuing apprenticeships in the skilled trades and in the fields that will produce innovation. You know, China and India graduate over 500,000 engineers and scientists a year, and the number is increasing. Meanwhile, in Canada and North America, the percentage of graduates in both fields is falling. That is not acceptable. Without young scientists, engineers, and researchers, how can we make the discoveries? How do we create the products and develop the production processes that will keep our manufacturing ahead of the curve? How can we expect to compete successfully in these tough global markets? We need a breadth of post-secondary options so that our young people can pursue the paths that will be most rewarding to them and that will also enhance our productivity. We must focus on strengthening the full range of educational opportunities, elementary and secondary, literacy, post-secondary, adult education, job training, and every facet of lifelong learning. Let's consider Darwin again. It's not the biggest animals who survive, or the fastest, or the tallest. It's the smartest, the ones who are curious, who learn from experience, and who adapt to and master their environment. Canada's own environment has also been blessed with a natural endowment, our resources. And this is the second area where we need to adapt to ensure our continued competitiveness. Think of the huge potential presented by the untapped hydro resources that we have in Quebec and Manitoba, or the nuclear power expertise that we have here, or Alberta's oil sands. Our natural resources are in great demand. With the growth rates we're seeing in emerging economies, many expect that will remain true for years to come. You know, in fact, emerging economies now consume half of the world's energy and account for 80% of the oil demand growth. We must adapt to these realities by encouraging the types of policies and investments in Canada that will help our natural resource sector to grow, to attract investment, and to be a strong global player. We need a sector that is well connected to the customers in Canada, in the U.S., and around the globe, both fiscally and from a relationship standpoint. Let's make sure, too, that Canada continues to be known not just for our natural resource outputs, but even more importantly, for the associated technical knowledge and the engineering skills that, in fact, are our added value inputs. We need to capitalize on these special Canadian endowments, our resources, our people, and our know-how. And just as our people and industries must be flexible in order to seize opportunities in the transforming economy, so must our structures and our rules. And that's the third area where we have to be adaptable. Companies need to be agile. They need to make fast decisions, and they need to be able to move quickly after opportunities. If government policies aren't going to help, then they at least shouldn't be a hindrance. Think of the often burdensome regulatory process. In some cases, the time and headache of dealing with overregulation means that products and technology simply don't get introduced here in a timely manner or at all. It means that companies will look at other places to set up shop and invest, places in which it's simply easier to operate and where policies are seen as friendlier. It's not just regulations themselves, but it's also the difference in regulations. In the case of Canada and the U.S., that includes thousands upon thousands of small differences, which cause added costs wasteful duplication, delays, and a high degree of frustration for businesses, consumers on both sides of the border. Creating a more harmonized regulatory framework is essential, especially as Canadian businesses seek to expand their supply chain and to participate in the supply chain of growing and emerging markets. A move towards regulatory convergence is a clear sign of our willingness to be flexible and to adapt to today's economic imperatives. As Darwin said, we must keep evolving. Fourth, as a business environment and as a society as a whole, we have to make sure that we remain a magnet to companies and to their people. Both are all more mobile than ever. Companies and people will go to places where they see opportunities and can prosper. What will keep them in or draw them to Canada? I don't have all the answers, but I do know that we have to be known as a place where entrepreneurs can start and grow, where we are open to foreign direct investment, where R&D flourishes but products can also be commercialized, and where we can add value into global operations. We are competing not just for companies, but for those people. And we often look to immigration as a solution for our population and our labor force needs. But many countries are actually looking to the same solution. Immigration can bring people who have the skills, experience, and attitude that can add immeasurably to our competitiveness and our national fabric. But who says that Canada will remain as attractive a destination as we have been in the past? Especially as emerging economies continue to grow like gangbusters, many people who in the past might have immigrated may see just as good, if not better, opportunities and quality of life at home. In fact, a Globe and Mail article just last week highlighted the significant decline in the number of applications from countries like China to immigrate to Canada. And this gets into the larger question of quality of life in Canada. Companies prosper when they can locate in places where people want to live and work. Will people find what they want in Canada, not just tomorrow, but for the generations of these 3 tables of students that are with us today? The Canadian landscape is riddled with ghost towns. Successful towns that died when they couldn't adapt to the changes in their environment. Societies evolve and become more or less livable, too. For many years we took pride, and rightly so, in Canada's performance on the United Nations Human Development Index, the HDI. And it compares countries across a series of interrelated factors like education and literacy, poverty, GDP. In the 1990s, Canada was number 1 on several occasions. In fact, you may even recall the ads that were touting this fact. We haven't heard very much about the HDI, have we? Maybe because we've been slipping on the list to 4th in 2004 to 5th in 2005. Which countries will be most livable in 5 years, in 10 years, and 20 years down the road? Where will our country, Canada, be on the list? How prosperous will our companies and citizens be? To ensure our prosperity, we must innovate and we must adapt. Yes, the world is changing. China is moving up behind us fast on the way to becoming America's top commercial partner. We face low-cost manufacturing from abroad. Jobs are being outsourced. Distances are shrinking. Borders are disappearing. New economies are emerging. But this is not an economic death knell. It's actually an incredible opportunity. Economic growth creates competition, that's right. But it also creates consumers and markets and creates demand for goods and services for industrial countries like ours. Will Canada be relevant in the fast-evolving world economy? We will if we embrace the opportunities instead of fearing the competition. We will if we look for ways to continue to make our businesses more competitive in a global world. And we will if we tap into the intellectual potential that is in this room and that is in our schools and our next generation. And we will if we welcome the challenge of becoming more innovative and becoming more productive. You know, that's a challenge that we in GE, we face every day as we expand our horizons and go into new global markets. Take our plant in Bromont, Quebec. That plant makes blades and vanes for aircraft engines. It is one of the most productive plants in the GE aviation world for one simple reason: the team's culture of incredible adaptability and innovation. They constantly compare themselves against and compete for resources with all the aviation plants that we have in the world. As a result, they're forced to constantly adapt, to be flexible, to improve. They eat productivity for breakfast. They love it, they do it, and they are a tremendous Canadian success story. This is the kind of spirit that makes me bullish on Canada. Being good enough isn't good enough. Succeeding in a local market or in your province often isn't good enough. Even making it in the U.S. market may not be good enough. It's the nature of my own business to think globally and consider how we in Canada will fit into the global supply chain and marketplace. We have to benchmark against the best and literally broaden our horizons to take advantage of this changing world economy. So let's not be complacent about our success. Let's install the structures and the policies and instill the attitudes needed to compete for people, ideas, and investment. Let's build on our natural strengths. Let's live up to our potential and remove the obstacles to our increased prosperity. So what will it take for things to change? After all, I'm on a number of business associations and interest groups, and we've been talking about these things for ages. A former political leader once told me that the government's priorities are defined by what people talk about in the church basements, or the temple, or the mosque, or the synagogue, basements too. Business groups and companies don't vote. People vote. You vote. And politicians listen to what's on the agenda of their constituents. As business and community leaders, we need to ensure that our employees and our fellow citizens are well educated, well trained, and well equipped to meet the ever-changing demands of today's workplace. It is our responsibility to help them understand the challenges and the opportunities before us as organizations, but also as a country. That includes making sure they see the world beyond our borders and our relative position in it. And we have to encourage frank talk about the kind of country that we want. Issues like healthcare waiting lists and our aging hips may affect us with more immediacy, but people have to think about our grandchildren's Canada. I would love for all of us to make crystal clear the link between our productivity and competitiveness, our health and happiness, and the quality of life that we all want to enjoy. A strong business and commercial sector is a critical underpinning. Yes, emerging markets are dramatically altering our economic and our competitive landscape. But I am confident in the ability of our people, our key sectors, our business environment, and our country to adapt. The challenges are enormous, but they are also incredibly exciting. You know, after reading Darwin, a British economist named Herbert Spencer coined the phrase survival of the fittest. That is what it will take to address the challenges we face today and in the decades ahead. But by being flexible and by being fit and embracing the opportunities before us, I am confident that Canada will do more than just survive in the global economy. we will thrive in that economy. Thank you very much.